туды, я период бразилийская медиана, какие-то 700 мяты я период расскажу по бразильскому. Я
My name is Anders. I'm in charge of this room. This is my pictures that you're looking at. Thank you so much for coming, first of all. This is all photography from Syria, Iraq, Turkey as well. I've been traveling there for the last 5 years, focusing on the Syrian conflicts. What used to be an uprising then turned into a civil war, and now it's just big players, I guess. Last time I went back was last year in September. I went to Iraq, photographed those Christian refugees you see down there in the corner. I'm afraid I can't go back into Syria right now. They say it's too dangerous. And I think that's quite a good example of what's actually happening or what has been happening to this conflict. This was my first trip back in 2011. September 2011, I went to Damascus. This was before the war was really on. There's a lot of things going on up in the north part of Syria. The rebels were starting to stir. There's a lot of killings up there. There's a lot of bombings as well. So I went to Damascus instead. I didn't photograph any conflict in Damascus because there wasn't any. Of course, there was military installations, but I was there supposed to be a tourist, so I couldn't just walk up to them and take pictures of it because, of course, I would be arrested. But that's one thing. The other thing was that it wasn't that interesting to do that because what would I be trying to sell by taking those kind of pictures that you would normally be taking in that kind of situation? So what I tried to do was to capture an emotion that I think that people were feeling being in that place at that time. I know that I was feeling that emotion being there at that moment in time. That idea of insecurity, that idea of not knowing what was about to happen, what was coming. Yeah. I lived in a small guest house with a Christian Syrian family. They were supporting Assad. They're very, very nice people, but they were supporting Assad at that point because they were afraid of the Muslims coming from the north, and they were afraid that these Muslim warriors, these Muslim rebels would do terrible things to them. So they were in support of Assad. So it's interesting for me living with these people, getting updates from Twitter, getting updates from Facebook, hearing about all these horrible things happening out in the rest of the country. And then going into the living room, meeting this lovely family that would invite me in for breakfast every morning. I would sit down with them and we would have these great talks. And they would be watching the public television channel. They would be watching like the Syrian BBC. And the Syrian BBC would be saying that yesterday in northern Syria, 50 rebels were killed and 50 government soldiers. And then when I went on to Twitter or when I looked at Al Jazeera, they would be telling me that 100 Syrian soldiers had been killed, or 100 rebels. So it's the same amount of people, but the ratio was just different. So that was very, very interesting experience of that. So that was what I was trying to capture in that situation. That feeling of not knowing, that feeling of fear, like not knowing what is about to come. That was my first trip. Then after that, I went back in 2012, 2013, shot these pictures. After these pictures over here, this is after the war really kind of started. So what you see here is much more like a more traditional war scenario, right? You see that guy there? That's Abu Bakr. He was a commander in this Free Syrian Army. He was a hero to the people there. He was a hero to the guys that I was traveling with as well. So when they saw him, they were just thrilled to actually meet him in person. And luckily, he was up for having his picture taken as well. That's another one I wanted to mention. That picture there, that portrait with the guy sitting with the back to you. Yeah. For me, taking that picture, actually not taking it, but to see that picture afterwards on my computer, I felt a little bit scared. Not just because of what it was symbolizing, but also because I knew how a picture like that would be used back home. I'm Danish, so I knew exactly how that would be used in Denmark, by the Danish opposition, by the extreme right wing in Denmark right now, you know, terrible people, racist, fear foreigners, all that. I could just see a picture like that being used in one of the campaigns saying, vote for us because of else, and then you see a picture like that. But the thing is, when I look at that picture, I know those guys, and I know how well they took care of me there. I know what their dreams were. They were fighting for a free Syria. They were fighting for their own freedom. So it's interesting also to look at how pictures can be used in different ways, what stories are actually being told with photography, and especially how photography what stories photography tells in the situation when you're taken, and then how they're used back, especially in the West. And that was when I started doing that series down there. You see the Polaroids? Yeah? Those Polaroids are all shots. They're all photographed correctly, they're exposed correctly, they are real photographs. It's shot on an old type Polaroid camera. So when you pull that type of Polaroid out of the camera, it glues together and then it starts to develop. You have to wait 1 minute and then you have to peel them apart and then you have the picture. So I shot the picture, but I just never peeled it apart. So the picture is still trapped in there, right? After doing that, I would hand the Polaroid over to people there, people being part of this serial revolution, and ask them to write. Didn't tell them what to write, just asked them to write whatever they wanted. If you turn them over, you'll see the translation on the back, so please go ahead and do that afterwards. And I did that to try to question how we use photography in the West. How we use photography as a way to tell the stories that I want to tell. I often think that when I go out and take a picture like that, that's not that much about Syria and the situation there. It's much more about me as a photographer. It's more about me showing off, showing you guys, if you like this picture, I'll be showing you, look, what a great photographer I am. I'm not saying that I am, or that is that amazing picture, but you see what I'm trying to say with that, right? That idea. And that's what I'm trying to question down there. I'm not saying that it's wrong to do those things, because I'm still doing it, and it's really important to go out there and tell those stories visually as well as in text. But sometimes we just have to question what stories are actually being told to us and how we're using them. Because sometimes what happens with photography, especially media photography, newspaper photography, is that it's almost like a product. I go out there, I take it, I send it to a newspaper, they show it to you guys, and we digest it, right? Oh, sorry. Then we spit it out afterwards, and it's almost like it's never been. It's just disappearing in a way, and I'm almost like just entertaining you by showing some really horrible things sometimes. So that's the idea about with those Polaroids, if that makes sense. And remember to read the translations in the back. Places of conflict, don't want to talk much about that, just have a look at it. My last trip to Syria was, my last trip to Iraq was, as I mentioned before, last year, 2014, where I went to Iraqi Kurdistan. Those are those pictures down there, there's a few mixed in up here as well, to meet the refugees that are fleeing ISIS right now. Of course, that's not happening in Syria, but because of everything that's happening in Syria, we have allowed, and I'm saying we, on purpose, we have allowed an organization like ISIS to really come into power, right? And to evolve, and to have power over us in a way as well. So I went there to meet these people, Christian refugees. It's not about the religion, it's simply just to meet some of those refugees really being affected by the situation there. You see that girl in the first picture all the way down there? She's 27 years old, that's her son, he's 2, she's 7 months pregnant. She lived in Mosul until ISIS came. She was forced to flee because of her religion. When she got to the border crossing that ISIS was controlling, her and her husband lived in a car, had a big house back in Mosul. I think he was a carpenter. When they got to the border crossing, they were taken out of the car, they were standing on the street. ISIS took her earrings off and told her to go. And that's a 7 months pregnant woman. So there's really touching stories out there when you meet those people. We read about them every day in the newspaper. Often I'm afraid that every time you open up a newspaper, you look at one of those pictures, you see it, and then the next moment, you forget about it again. I know I do. So hopefully seeing these pictures here